All right, everybody, welcome to this week's piXL Drone Show. Today's going to be a special episode, and we're going to focus on what drones can do in the world for good and how drones help to save people's lives. And DJI has a number that keeps sticking up as more and more people around the world are being helped and saved by drones. And to discuss more about this topic, who else could we better bring to the table than Romeo Durscher? I think most people know Romeo from working at DJI for, I think, about 6 years. As the Senior Director of Public Safety Integration. He recently moved to Auterion, which is an entirely different company. So we definitely want to ask him some questions about that. And yeah, I mean, let's dive right into it. Romeo, welcome to the show. And can you tell us a little bit about what happened and what made you make this career change, basically?
Yeah, so this is exciting. I think this is show number 6. So I made it into the top 10 first shows. So I'm excited. Thank you for having me on the program. I'm actually super excited because I've not only watched this particular show, some of the previous 5 episodes, but also, I tune into Greg's show quite frequently because there's always very, very good information. One of the latest ones about what does it mean to fly over people? Very well illustrated, and such an important topic, especially right now. So I'm super excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to what we can discuss. Yeah, now a lot of things have happened in the last few months. I mean, if I look back in the last six months, personally, a lot has changed. After 6 years with, yes, the leading manufacturer in the drone industry and really the company that has gotten us to this point, I made the decision to leave and go to a different company. And I joined the Auterion team, and for a very, very good reason, because I wanted to get back to that vision piece I had many, many years ago. DJI really allowed me to bring a lot of that vision I had in 2013, 14, to the table. And we were able as a team to really create technology that has made a big impact. But there were additional things that I wanted to do that I just could not do at DJI. And so I made that hard decision to leave and join Auterion. And at Auterion, I can follow that vision, that passion. And now people may ask, well, what else can there be? I mean, we have reached the top of the drone industry. Boy, no, we have not. There is so much more. And I'm super excited about not only different platforms, working with different drones, working with different concepts, working with a different open platform, open standards, a full data integration. And that's really where I think the future will happen. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that throughout this episode. What does it really mean? The big driver was going back to the vision that I had and fulfilling that piece.
And I think Campfire is the one that you have very much inside knowledge of, Romeo. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Natural disasters, it's a very, very good opportunity for drone technology to come in and help. And we here in California have had some really bad wildfires, and I've deployed to 3 of those fires, including the Campfire in Paradise, which was just the most devastating wildfire that we've seen in a very, very long time. And it's not just using this technology to help save lives, rescue lives, save buildings, but it's also to mitigate the risk to our first responders, because it's about the data. The drones are providing us tremendous amount of not only real-time data, but then also data that we can process so it becomes actionable data. And by using that data, having that accessibility, decision makers can make much better and smarter decisions that also protect our first responders. And that's a piece that we overlook oftentimes. And it's very difficult to quantify because, if this search and rescue person doesn't get injured because of the drone data, how do we measure that? But in reality, this person may have slipped and fallen down this cliff because this person may have not seen it. But thanks to the drone, we had better data to say, hey, don't go that path because there's a cliff, for example. So those passive lives saved, we don't often talk about it, and they are actually the ones that have an even bigger impact. Because think about it, if we can save a firefighter from injury or even from losing his or her life, we're not only doing an emotional contribution, but we're saving tax dollars. Because now this individual is not out of service, is not, the team doesn't have to adjust, bring in somebody from a different department, people that have not worked together perhaps. So it has a fiscal impact, it has an emotional impact, and that is something we just don't talk and see often enough.
You know, this hits home for me. I live in Arizona. I actually live in Prescott. And several years ago, we lost a crew of hotshots. I'm sure you're familiar with the hotshots. Those are the guys that get deployed in the middle of the fire. We lost 17 of them in a fire, and this is tragic for a town like, well, it's tragic anywhere really, not just for our town. But and of course back then, this was in 2013, I want to say, back then the drones were not being used, and I can see them being more and more utilized now with the Forest Service. At Prescott Airport, we have a big firefighting unit that does this all summer, and of course out west, we're devastated by fires year after year after year. So this really hits home for me what you have been doing. When I came on board in the industry, I always heard your name, and you're the public safety guy, and I'm so happy to see you here in person. You have been the reference that so many people have talked about. So my question to you has to do with a little bit of the future down the road. Drones are being utilized right now. Drones have limitations in a certain way because they can't really carry too much weight. They can't, at the moment, we can't go too far for too long. UAM is on my mind for drones. You know, a lot of people are talking about air taxi and carrying people left and right in the middle of crowded cities. How do you see UAM being utilized, or AAM, I think they're called now, being utilized in the public safety world? Maybe picking up someone from the Grand Canyon and bringing them up when they broke their ankle, and they can come back up. What do you see with that as a future?
That's an interesting question. Let me quickly go back to the hotshots. There's a team that a couple of years ago I worked with, and out of the hotshot, world, and these individuals to me are, unspoken heroes that jump out of a perfectly normal airplane into the heart of a wildfire. It's tremendously amazing that we have women and men that are that brave for the betterment for all of us. And when they get into that situation, the idea was that they have a quick deploy drone with them. Problem is they already have a lot of equipment, and now we need to add another piece. But if it's a quick deploy drone that has potentially thermal and visible light capabilities, then they, no matter where they are, can quickly put this thing up and get situation awareness, because where they are, seconds count. And so every little piece of information helps them to survive and come home that evening. And that's exactly the kind of thing that the drones are so good, because we've gotten to the point where they're small enough, light enough, capable enough that they can go as an additional piece of equipment and help save their lives. Mm-hmm. Now, moving into the future, do you remember that I think it was like late 1950s TV show, The Jetsons? It was a comic show about this futuristic family that, flying cars, and we had Rosa the robot that cleans at home. Even 50, 60 years ago, the future looked like flying vehicles with people in it. And 60 years later, well, we're not quite there yet. We are barely at the brink of self-driving vehicles. And while the technology, exists, we do hear of accidents and we hear of fatalities. Until we have not only figured out the technology part, but also the ethical aspect of it, because when we use autonomy for technology to make decisions, there is a big ethical aspect. For example, in this self-driving vehicle, assuming that the program is that it has to protect the person or people inside that vehicle, that's number one priority. So what happens if a child enters the road and this vehicle needs to make a decision? Who is more important, the child or the people inside? What if that child now is an 85-year-old person that is terminally ill? Does that change the value proposition? And those are the ethical questions that also apply to this concept of flying vehicles, because something will go wrong at some point, and then a decision has to be made. Do we crash land? Do we just continue on and crash into this building or into this other plane, or whatever the case is? So there's a lot of things that need to properly be thought through before they become reality. Now, what I do foresee is that in areas of disaster response, unfortunately, the battlefield, where we have real opportunities to extract injured or potentially deceased individuals, there I can see a tremendous opportunity for this technology in future years to be implemented and to make a big impact. For regular everyday life, the aerial taxi, I just don't foresee it happening anytime soon. It's a fantastic, the Jetson future, but it's much more complex.
Yeah, and I think there's so many more applications that we can focus on at first. I love what you said about picking up people, air ambulance. I mean, you have an accident somewhere and then you need to have them go directly to the hospital without getting a helicopter involved, which will take a lot longer than getting just a large UAS to come down. I think I love that application of UAM. I think this is going to be amazing. So, but yeah, I'm with you on the priority of things. We're going to have to decide which way we're going to go. And this is something that in the manned aircraft world, we already have. The pilot, when you have a crash, the pilot goes down with the aircraft and tries to put it in a place that's not going to hurt anyone. And now we don't have anyone inside of the aircraft, so we're going to have to make a decision. But with UAM, we may have somebody inside of the aircraft that's not piloting. So, Haye, yeah, all yours.
Yeah, I was going to try to bring it back to drones for a second. If we look at the future of drones and how drones can be used to help and save people's lives, I mean, we now have drones that are very, very capable. They can fly the distance. They have the transmission quality that we need. They have thermal cameras. They have enough flight time to actually spend quite some time up in the air, and they're affordable by now. If you look at the future of those kind of drones, and you can talk about the Evo or let's say the Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. I mean, what are the big hurdles that we now need to overcome, looking, let's say, into the next 3, 4, 5 years, when it's not so much the drone anymore, but maybe it's flying beyond visual line of sight or other regulations, or how do we manage the data and process imagery in real time? Like, what are the kind of hurdles that you see that we need to overcome for drones to become even more effective as a life-saving tool?
Yes, and that ties into my vision piece and why I decided to join Auterion, because hardware will continue to improve. We have, capabilities already that are amazing in a small form factor that for the most part is pretty affordable. Regulations will continue to improve. We've come pretty far fairly fast, and we have to understand that we're working in an environment of a government. Government usually never works super fast, and we're operating in 3D space where everything that we decide can potentially have a negative impact on people below it. And so obviously regulation is always a little bit behind, for sometimes good reasons, other times not so good reasons, but we're making progress. So those two pieces will continue to improve. But what's really, really where we have come to is data. And the data is the new gold or the new oil that is so valuable. And that's really one of the reasons why I wanted to go into a place where we can really start thinking about the future of data workflows. Because I'm going to tell you this, for consumers, an SD card is perfect. You know, this is what we have growing up since digital cameras came to market. We have SD cards, we take our pictures, we offload them. It's great. For enterprise, it doesn't work anymore. This is like you're out in the desert looking for oil, you're digging, and you have this beautiful oil that now shoots out of the ground, and you are still as poor as 10 minutes ago because that oil is not going nowhere. Now you have to really build the line, the pipes, to get the data to the place where it can be processed. And that's exactly where we are. I am on this quest to introduce the near death of the SD card. And that sounds really horrible, but it is, we gotta get away from the SD card if we really wanna do scalable enterprise drone deployments. So what does that mean? Well, if anytime I have to take an SD card out and then put it potentially into an adapter and then put it into a laptop and offload it to my laptop hard drive and then upload it to some servers, that's not scalable. And we saw that every single time on our natural disaster deployments, we lost SD cards because they are small, they are not practical. We had hard times getting them out because we had cold hands, we had hot hands, we were sweaty, we had wet hands. So that's number one. We gotta get away from the SD card concept. If we have a fully integrated data pipeline in the background where I take the image and the image, without me doing anything, goes into my workflow at the other end, and not only that, but then automatically goes into maybe my Pix4D, my Esri, whatever my end product desire is. Now we're starting to think and talk about really scalable enterprise workflows. And that's what one of our mission is at Auterion, to enable this data pipeline that happens in the background on any of the different drones that are Auterion powered. So open standards, any drone manufacturer can manufacture into this ecosystem of Auterion powered drone. Any payload can go on it because it's an open standard, and any end solution can be attached to it because there are APIs, and suddenly you have a way to replace entire fleets with different aircrafts, different manufacturers, but it's one standard, it's one user interface, it's one data workflow. Now that becomes very interesting to enterprise.
I think it was a year and a half or 2 years ago when I saw one of your presentations about the campfire, and a lot of it had to do with prepping drones and having this many drones up in the air, this many people flying these drones. But I remember hearing you say that the biggest challenge was processing thousands and thousands of images as fast as possible so that you get a somewhat up-to-date overview of what the situation on the ground was like. And that was my takeaway from your presentation back then, that processing all that data was actually your biggest challenge in that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, go on.
Oh, no, I have a quick question. I was fortunate enough to interview Dave Sharpen, CEO of Auterion, quite a few months ago. And at the time, you were working with the U.S. government. Have you expanded to other governments? Do you plan to? He said he couldn't talk about it yet, but I thought I'd just jump in there and ask. It's been a burning question.
So obviously, so we have a government solution entities here in the United States that focuses solely on the U.S. government. And the U.S. government, with what has happened over the last several months with certain Chinese entities being added to the entities list, has now a different need. And Auterion is one of the solutions that really meets that need. And we will continue to focus on supporting federal U.S. entities across the spectrum. So that will continue to happen. Obviously, that also awakens the interest of other entities, and how we are dealing with that in the future we will further review, but our focus right now really is US government, US entities that have a real big need to maybe switch from those manufacturers under the NDAA structure to something that's compliant. And that's where really Auterion comes in with our various products through different third-party manufacturers that are compliant with those requirements.
My next question, I want to go back a little bit to what you just said about an entire ecosystem where you're sending data, I'm assuming in the cloud somewhere, and then the data gets processed off-site somewhere else. Are we at the point now with the current infrastructure where we can actually do this? Because I'm assuming the amount of data you're talking about is not small. And adding to this, where do you see SpaceX Starlink system going into play with this? Because I know they're designing the system of, for those of you that are listening that are not familiar, satellite system all across the world, really, to get high-speed internet to a lot of people. So tell us more a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a few different components to all of this. So yes, the way Auterion works, and this is very different than pretty much any other company in this industry. So we make one piece of hardware, and that is Skynote. And Skynote is the flight controller that also has a mission computer as well as a connectivity device. So 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, mesh network, whatever the case is, all in one. And now a drone manufacturer, they can use this flight controller and build the drone around it. So that allows the manufacturer to go to market much quicker with a PX4 flight controller, PixHawk standard on top of it, that also has a payload manager. So any of the payloads that are available on this standard can be integrated. So it makes life for manufacturers so much simpler. And because we have that connectivity piece in there, now the drone becomes, in essence, the device that sends the data to, if it's 5G, to the 5G tower. If you're doing a local, network, then to the local network. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, you're absolutely right. Oftentimes, especially during a disaster, we may not have good connectivity. And that is something that we will continue to face until we have some sort of solution that either is based off the ground solutions like Starlink, where the satellites are in space and you're communicating through there. So if there's a wildfire, if there's a hurricane, they're not impacted by it. The satellites are way above that region. Or then we work with on-the-ground networks, mesh network capabilities, so that at least the people in the vicinity get the data immediately, which in most cases, if we talk about disaster response, is what's important, that the right people on the ground get that information. But the future really is that we envision a very in real-time data transmission of large data sets to, maybe the headquarters of the inspection company, where engineers are already sitting in front of the Auterion suite, looking at the data coming in and saying, hey, a drone operator, this is a perfect shot. I see everything I need to see, or maybe can you go a little bit more to the right? Or that I, as the engineer, can even control the camera from my office when the operator is flying out in the field. So that communication, it is starting to happen. The other piece is, and I keep saying that about 80% of an image we take with a drone is of no use. There's only maybe 20% of data in that image that is of importance for us. So if we take a picture of a cell tower, there's all the sky, there is, the structure of the tower, there's the background, that is of no importance to us. If we get to the point where we can just take the data that is important to us and put that through the pipeline, we're reducing the amount of data that needs to be transmitted dramatically. So that's why I love the fact that we have come to the point where we're putting focus on the data piece, where departments and enterprise entities have realized, wait a second, in order for us to scale up our deployment, we need a much more focused data process. And that to me is super exciting.
Oh, it is. That I never thought about what you just said, but man, it makes so much sense. I'm really glad that you mentioned that. It makes a lot of sense. I have a follow-up question, actually, since we're talking a little bit about technology. I want to talk about remote ID a little bit. Last week, we had Loretta Alcali. We talked about remote ID, but we didn't talk about remote ID as applied to public safety. What advantages do you see? What kind of benefits do you see coming out of remote ID for public safety? I can see one, because this is something that, like I said, wildfires are a big thing around here, and we see drones flying around during wildfires. And to me, having the ability for the police department or for the fire department to see where the person is flying to go stop them, I think that's a pretty big deal. But do you see any other applications out there for remote ID?
Yeah, so remote ID, it is an important piece, and I am very much in favor for remote ID because it gives the transparency, it gives the responsibility back also to the operator. I mean, you're driving a vehicle on the street, you have a license plate. If you run a red light and it takes a picture of you, you have to be responsible for it. And similarly to the drone. Now, there's two sides of it when we look at it from a public safety perspective. So let's look in the eyes of maybe law enforcement. And maybe law enforcement has a high-risk warrant arrest where they want to utilize drones because they want to make sure that this individual or these individuals don't jump out of the window in the backside of the building and go running. So they want to put a couple drones up to just secure the area. Now, if they have to have remote ID, and I am Romeo, the bad guy inside, and I'm using available technology, now I suddenly know that, oh my God, they're out there with drones. That's counterproductive. So from a public safety perspective, we also need to make sure that certain operations don't or have the opportunity or possibility to turn off remote ID, just like ADS-B. When you see a military aircraft, there is no ADS-B. Even a Coast Guard don't broadcast on ADS-B because exactly of that concept. Now, if we're on the other side of the fence, let's say I'm law enforcement or I'm fire, and we have a secure area, and suddenly these drones come in. Like we had those instances at the wildfires where we deployed UAV tracking technology, mostly for us as kind of like a air control system to see where are all of our drones. But suddenly we picked up a third-party drone that was not clear, and we were able to mitigate by sending a unit to that location. That was tremendously helpful, because what we don't want is we don't want to shut down the crewed air traffic, because they're still actively flying the fire lines, dropping water, doing missions. And if there is an unspecified drone in the area, unidentified drone in the area, they have to shut down their entire operation, and we don't want that. So remote ID has definitely a big opportunity. And another case, many years ago, I think it was New Year's of 2018, there was a very big interest in securing a couple cities in the United States with drone detection technology, because there was intel that at midnight, a lot of drones would be flying. And so thanks to that, we deployed some technologies and before midnight started to watch the skies. And what was amazing was the amount of drones that were up starting at like 5 minutes before midnight, because everybody wanted to film the firework. And there are, this is pre-COVID, there's tens of thousands of people in the streets, watching. And there are these, from small drones to big heavy lift drones just buzzing overhead in all different directions. And unfortunately, we've come to the point where we also have to think about potential danger that comes from these drones in a targeted way, that these drones are being used to disrupt, to injure, or to even kill individuals. So sadly, we have come to the point where remote ID is just becoming another tool to help us be responsible, to help us take ownership, and to also protect us from, something that could potentially harm us.
Great response. I totally agree.
Yeah, so things have moved so fast. It's amazing.
It is amazing, and I think with drones becoming more affordable and smaller, and at the same time more and more capable, I guess another interesting question would be, okay, for Auterion to make your system work. I saw on your website that for part of the system, you guys seem to focus on larger and even some fixed-wing drones. Does it also work on, let's say, a Phantom 4 or even a Mavic drone or an Autel Evo drone? Like, can you imply the same systems that you guys are developing at Auterion for smaller, more affordable drones, or is that still more difficult because of the hardware that needs to be added to those unmanned aircraft?
The best way to look at it is Apple versus Android. So DJI is Apple, very closed system, no open source, not really any standards, and very, very locked down in the way you get access to it to utilize it. And then there is Auterion, which really is the Android version. So the operating system is the same, no matter if you have a Sony phone or if you have a Google phone. The functionality is the same, the apps are the same, the user experience, you can switch from one manufacturer over to the other, and it just feels very, very much the same. And that's really the premise of it. We want to focus on this open standard. And that also allows one very, very important piece, and that is the standardization of the use. So I'll give you an example. In the DJI world, we have all these different platforms, and we learned that there is no one drone that does it all. For certain missions, you need maybe a smaller platform. For other missions, you maybe need something a little larger with different payloads. So there's no one size fits all. The challenge with DJI is that we had one app for this drone, a different app for that drone, and a third app for this drone. And those apps didn't feel the same, didn't look the same, didn't operate the same way. And now that makes it extremely difficult to standardize. Now you have to learn every single app. And that is just not very practical, especially for, enterprise where, we are geeks, and I am a nerd. And of course I love learning those apps because I love drones. But this fireman that becomes a drone operator, he may not have the same type of love to drones. And for this person, having to learn all these different systems is a pain. Yep. So on the Auterion side, if I fly a Vantage Robotics Vesper, which is a small, kind of like a Mavic 2 platform, it's a Blue SUS approved platform. If I fly that one, and then I realize, you know what, I need a VTOL, and I switch over to my Quantum Systems a Vector, which is a 9-foot vertical takeoff and landing drone. I can use the same radio, I can use the same interface, the same buttons, and the flight characteristics feel very much the same because it's built on the Skynote flight controller, our Auterion Skynote flight controller. So the experience going from one to the other is so seamless. And now if the data in the background is as seamless, it changes really the approach that we're taking in delivering what is needed for these enterprise entities.
You guys are like the Airbus of the UAS world, where you can get a rating on the 319, 320, 321, and then it carries over to a 340. And I mean, it makes sense. It makes total sense to me from a training standpoint. It makes sense to teach your units on one platform, and then it cuts across to a small or large drone. 100%. So, Kara, I think you had a question.
Oh, this is cutting into the future, but I read a quote from you. Ultimately, drones will lead us to new discoveries here on Earth, which is obvious. We've been talking about that, and other planets. Now, we saw a helicopter/drone land earlier this month on Mars, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more on what discoveries you think are going to happen on other planets, what you think drones are capable of, where the technology is now, and also maybe a decade into the future. That may be a loaded question, but if anyone can answer it, it's you.
This is probably one of my favorite topics because it combines my kind of previous life. Before I joined the drone industry, I worked in space science, and rockets and space exploration had always been a huge passion of mine. And then, of course, today's world, today's life with drones all in one. I mean, the fact that we can talk about this is incredible because think about it. Less than 120 years ago, we had the first powered flight. And then 60 plus years later, we landed on the moon and we brought people safely back to Earth. And today we have a helicopter on a planet in our solar system that has barely any atmosphere compared to what we have here on Earth. And this thing is surviving the most challenging of environments. There is no atmosphere that protects. There's no magnetic field line that protects the surface from solar radiation, galactic radiation. It is cold at night. And this little tiny helicopter survives Martian days and Martian nights, and then gets commands from Earth that take minutes to get there. And it spools up. And despite all of these challenges, it lifts off and it flies around. That piece alone is something where we should be getting chills because that is so freaking cool. And if this doesn't make it cool to you, then on this little helicopter is a piece of the original Wright brothers plane that flew almost 120 years ago for the very first time. And it's now on a different planet flying again. I mean, that by itself now should get your hairs on the back of your neck standing up. This is how cool it is. But what does it mean besides being cool? Well, what it really means is we have robotics on Mars. We've had robotics on Mars for a couple decades, if not longer, that have been, sending us data back to give us a much different understanding of the red planet. And now we can go further. We can now start flying and going to places where it would have taken us maybe years to get to. And our understanding will grow. Our capabilities will grow. I mean, we're creating oxygen on Mars. And what does that mean? Well, eventually we will visit Mars as individuals, as humans. And we have to, because if we humans are not going to destroy Earth first, our sun will. Our sun will get to the point where it's going to burn out. And it will not create this, huge explosion. Our sun is not large enough to do that, but it will expand and it will change the environment, and then it will just collapse and it will definitely kill all life on Earth. So within the next, 3-4 billion years, we gotta get off this planet. Otherwise, we will become like dinosaurs. We will be extinct. And so from that perspective, having the ability to now roam around from a different perspective on Mars is very similar as the first time I flew a drone here at home. I saw my environment from a different perspective. I saw things I had never seen before. I got a very different appreciation and understanding of my surrounding. And that is the beautiful thing about science and technology meeting each other and doing things that we never thought would be possible.
It's a very good example. Obviously, the drone flying on planet Mars is beyond visual line of sight. Going back to planet Earth, how important is it for first responders to be able to fly their drones beyond visual line of sight? And are there countries around the world where that's already legalized? And how much of a hindrance is it for firemen and other search and rescue crews to not be able to fly beyond visual line of sight here in the United States?
So, you know, oftentimes when we think about beyond visual line of sight, we think distance, because that's what comes to mind. But it can be as simple as this particular scenario. In Canada, a few years ago, in the capital city, there was this huge sinkhole. So the ground gave away and it just dropped. And there was a drone operator from the fire department that flew the drone, and he was standing not too far away in a safe distance from the sinkhole. He went inside because they wanted to see what kind of pipes were broken. Is there water? Is there gas? You know, get visualization of how bad is the situation. So now this drone drops below the ground, and now even though it may only be, you know, 200 feet away from the drone operator cannot see the drone anymore. And guess what? This is already beyond visual line of sight, as it is in the term. You don't see it anymore, even though the distance is 200 feet. And the drone operator got into trouble, even though it was a public safety person. It didn't help that it was right in front of the Parliament building in the capital city of Canada. Does it make sense? Well, on the regulatory side, yes. But in practicality, no. Is he going to endanger another aircraft? Well, if so, then we have a whole different set of problems. If there's an airplane that low, so there's challenges with that whole beyond visual line of sight. In the US, there is now a process to do a tactical beyond visual line of sight, which is a short distance, but exactly that. Maybe you're around the building, around the corner, or you have to drop into a stadium, and for a moment you're not actually seeing the drone. And if there are some waivers to get that, the future will be that we can deploy these platforms on larger distances with remote ID, with UTM integration. You know, it's going to happen. But for public safety, you know, I always say, when you come from nothing and suddenly you get something, you are so happy that you have something that is so better than nothing that you don't mind that it's not perfect. And in most incidents, you fly the drone in a pretty close proximity. Some variations, hazmat scenarios, you may be, you know, a mile away from the hot zone because you cannot be any closer. It could be hazardous to your health. There, it would potentially be nice to maybe have 2-mile range, but that may be beyond visual line of sight, depending on what kind of drone you're flying. But for the most part, most public safety operations are conducted easily within line of sight. Another example is search and rescue, where you want to cover as much ground as possible. And, you know, if life and death is at stake, I will make this claim that most public safety official will do a risk assessment and will say, you know what, if I can save this life, I am going to push the boundaries on this particular case because I've done this risk assessment, and go for it and deal with the consequences later. especially when that life can be saved. Is it the best way to go about it? No, it shows that there is still somewhat of a gap in certain situations, what is allowed and what is not allowed. But, you know, life and death always should have a little bit more of a leeway.
I have a follow-up on that. Do you know of any, because the US, obviously, other than the SGI special waiver that you can get to fly beyond visual line of sight for a very short period of time, do you know of any other countries in the world that have different layers of beyond visual line of sight?
Not easy accessible. Of course, there are certain countries that you know, are a little bit underdeveloped. That's almost like still the wild, wild west. But even those countries are becoming smaller and smaller. There is more and more regulatory environments being built up. But it's just not a concept that's easily understood and implemented in a safe way, because it is a global issue. And I think if Europe, if the United States finds a way to really make that possible, it could very well become the global standard.
Yeah, and I can see, you know, you were talking about having the backpack and the firefighters and the hotshots having a little drone in their backpack. I can see them being in the middle of a fire and having to go see what's going on around the area and easily be out of visual line of sight and still be perfectly safe and saving their lives as well. So that's another great application here where short beyond visual line of sight would totally make sense. Haye, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, we talk a lot about first responders and search and rescue crews using drones, and of course, in our news programs, we cover those stories globally. But can you help us get a bit of an understanding of how widespread the uses of drones within fire departments, police departments, search and rescue in the United States? I mean, are we actually making progress? Do most of those departments now have drones in their toolkit, or are we just still scratching the surface and is one out of every 100 departments that might have a Mavic in their backpack somewhere?
So I think we have made very, very strong progress. Just to give you some general numbers, there are, you know, roughly 40,000 departments in the US, and there are about 500 departments that have access to a helicopter or a crewed aircraft. So there's a whole huge market that has no or very little access to a crewed aircraft. And so now drone technology comes to the market, and obviously there is a big benefit. But now public safety is a very traditional industry. You know, you have fire chiefs, you have police chiefs that have spent their entire career dedicated to the service. And it's a very traditional way of doing things. It's very standardized. And now this disruptive technology. And in the early days, there were a lot of you know, fire chiefs and police chiefs that said, you know, I am a few years away from retirement. Why would I bring in this toy technology? And, you know, we've done it for 50 years this way. We've done it for 30 years this way. Why change it? But what happened was it was kind of like a grassroots movement where the younger firefighters, the younger police officers have come in and said, hey, we have all this technology here that we could use and implement and figure out and make our jobs efficient, more easy, more safe, help the communities, and put a lot of pressure within departments to start engaging. And suddenly, you know, you start using this technology and you show a couple wins, and it changes the mindset. Now, reality also is not every fire incident, not every search and rescue, and not every law enforcement incident requires a drone, nor does every department need a drone program. But this technology, as well as other technologies that provide us with data, really allow for a different approach and for more transparency, so that we as a community can also feel more engaged and more visible what our departments are doing. And here in the United States, I always say that in the United States, if you see a fireman flying a drone, you are happy and applauding. But when you see a police officer flying a drone, you're like, wait a second, what is he doing? He must be looking at someone's backyard. That's a very, very cultural phenomena. We don't see it that as much in Europe, although even in Europe, there is slight differences between fire and law enforcement, but not as distinct as here. So drones can also contribute to that transparency factor. And we see departments that do an amazing job in socializing their drone missions, showcasing why are we using drones. For example, Marin County Sheriff's Office. Marin County is north of San Francisco, right on the other side of the Golden Gate. Every quarter, they release a document with all their drone flights, where they flew, why they flew, and what was the outcome. And now suddenly, you have a lot of transparency. And that is what's also helping with building community trust. But it really boils down to not everyone, not every citizen, and not every department needs a drone.
I have a personal question for you. You and I and Haye, we all speak with a funny accent. What brought you to the United States? How did you end up here, and how did you end up in the aviation world?
So that all went back to 1989 when there was the Challenger accident. Space Shuttle Challenger, 70 seconds after launch, exploded, and the entire United States was watching. School children were watching because the first teacher was on board of Challenger. And obviously we were time delayed in Switzerland, but the next day I saw this, and it was devastating yet fascinating that we had this beautiful spaceship that just explodes. And that kind of started my interest in space exploration. And that incident allowed me to start a newspaper. And I was like a little Haye in Switzerland talking about one topic. That's why did this rocket explode? And I think my viewership was like 2 people, me and probably somebody else, I hope. And I would write letters to NASA because back then we didn't have internet. And it was incredible. Actually, it was 1986. Sorry, not 89. And at the time, it took weeks to get a response back from NASA, but I did. And they would send me documents of the investigation, and I would translate those documents with my very, very broken and non-sophisticated scientific English capabilities, because we learn all other languages first before English, at least back then, and would then put that in my newspaper, and my newspaper would be like 3 months behind actual time. And I guess that's why nobody was reading about it. But that's when I decided that someday I want to work on a space project. And we do a lot of great things in Switzerland, watches and chocolate and cheese and banking, but we don't do space exploration much. So I had the opportunity to move to the US. I took it, and I got my foot in the door on a NASA space project, and I spent almost 13 years doing that. And then I just fell into this whole drone world, and here we are.
Wow, what an incredible story. I love it. Kara, go ahead.
Are you still based in San Jose? I thought you were based in San Jose.
Yeah, I am still here in San Jose, the heart of Silicon Valley. I came here for the first time when I was 14 to spend the summer learning English. And I fell in love with San Jose. It was just so amazing to me that we have all this technology here and these big roads. And I knew that someday I would move to San Jose. And so I did. In my early 20s, I moved to San Jose, and I spent most of my time here in San Jose. I lived in Las Vegas for 5 years, but was telecommuting back and forth to San Jose. So my heart is in not San Francisco, but San Jose.
That's awesome. I used to live in San Francisco, but I can see how San Jose is more appealing, especially for you, for your background in history. So that's awesome.
What is the one thing, or maybe one project or one outcome that either at DJI or now at Auterion that you've worked on that you're the most proud of, that you think has made a big impact in the industry, in the public safety world? Which one is that?
You know, I've been so, you know, blessed in a way that I've been able to do so many different projects that have led to many discoveries, that have to new technologies, to new drone models. I've been behind the M200, the Mavic 2 Enterprise. I pushed those platforms so hard because of all the lessons learned, the case studies, the validation projects we did, the search and rescue study, how effective are drones to really validate the use of the technology. There's so many that have contributed. It would be hard to pick just one. On a personal level, one of the most satisfying project was when we went to the Son Dong cave, the world's largest cave in Vietnam, with ABC Good Morning America, and we did a live broadcast with drones out of the cave system back to the studio in New York and into the households across the United States. That was at the time, 2015, when the technology was nothing like it is today. An incredible feat from everyone involved, and a true adventure that, you know, has really given me so much personal satisfaction. And I met some of the most wonderful friends and people that we are still in touch with today. I would say personally that was the most satisfying project. Seeing now that we are, you know, saving and rescuing lives across the globe because of a vision and because of people that believed in my vision, that supported my vision and worked with me on it in the industry, but also outside the industry. That is really, it feels good. And obviously it takes people, it takes teams to make that happen. It takes individuals like yourself that help educate, that helps share the message, and that put your own spin on it to reach a broader community. So I think it's the whole community feeling that is what excites me the most, and that I think I'm the proudest of, that we have established a place where we have this opportunity to share, to educate, to learn from others, and to also pinpoint areas where we need improvement. And that's tremendously great to see.
You've built an amazing legacy. It's thank you for that.
Yeah.
You know, I have a hard time seeing it that way. Yes, I've been fortunate. I've been at the right place at the right moment. I've had people that listened to me, and I think that is the big thing. If you don't listen, if you don't try to understand, and if you don't try to work together, you can't be successful, especially not in an emergency technology that is really as disruptive as drone technology is. So I can't take the full credit. It really takes so many people to make this happen. I just happen to be at the forefront of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we're coming up to an hour. Maybe, I don't know if there's any other questions, but one question I wanted to ask you, Romeo, is like the whole campfire disaster or natural disaster took place in 2018. We're now coming up to another fire season in California, and I read recently that they're expecting with the current drought that it might be a pretty severe one as well. Have you seen any areas where we can expect drones to be even used more widely now, or are there new areas where we're going to see drones being used to help fight this upcoming wildfire season?
Yes, so this year as well as last year, we just are starting to hit those perfect storm environments. You know, we have a pandemic, we have a complete disruption in regular operations of public safety, which also includes the preparations for fire season. So there are large-scale pre-burns, controlled burns that happen annually to reduce the fuel in essence. And a lot of that has been disrupted because of the pandemic and because of certain technology regulatory impacts like entities ban, that we are in a very dire situation. And with the drought that is happening in California, we already have 2 counties that have been declared emergency counties because of the, we may face another very devastating wildfire season. And obviously using drones during an incident and post-incident is already great, but the value also comes from the mitigative side ahead of it. So using drone technology to map areas, to look for where do we need to potentially put ground efforts in to cut trees, cut bushes, burn bushes. So vegetation management, VTOL platforms, those mix between a wing aircraft and a drone that can fly for so much longer flight times than drones, 2 hours, 5 hours, depending on platforms. Those are extremely helpful to map a lot of these areas, and then send teams in a power line inspection. It's no secret that we have an aging infrastructure here in the United States, and many of the wildfires did originate because of downed power lines. So power line inspection, again, things that can be done before something happens. That's where we really need to put more effort into it. And then obviously during the wildfire, there are many great ideas on how drones can help bring equipment to the front lines. But those are also still very futuristic.
So a follow-up question there. I mean, the Department of the Interior had, I think, 810 drones in their fleet. I think it was the biggest government drone fleet in the United States that has been grounded. How much of an impact does it have that government agencies are not allowed, or government departments are not allowed to purchase and use Chinese-made drones and certain other drones to help and take these preventative measures, or even take emergency actions with drones when those emergencies or natural disasters take place?
It's absolutely a no-brainer that drone technology has helped the Department of Interior to be more effective, more efficient. There is no question about it. We went through a very geopolitical time over the last few years where a lot of these decisions did make a big impact on not only the Department of Interior, but other departments. And then also on the training side, because another thing that needs to happen is a much more standardized approach when it comes to training. In fact, if a firefighter in San Diego is a drone operator and moves maybe to, Rhode Island and gets a job there, this firefighter that is now being hired maybe is hired as a firefighter drone operator, but there is no standard. So the fire chief doesn't know what kind of qualification this person brings to the table. And so part of the Department of Interior was also a training program that they had established to really get standardized in the way we train for wildfire deployments, for example. And that, of course, got also disrupted. So it did have a big impact, but it also opened up the market for other companies to come in and develop technology that is NDAA compliant to help those federal agencies replace the fleet. Unfortunately, what we're also seeing is something that we saw in 2015, 2016, and that is that smoke and mirror approach where, everybody smells the blood in the water, that DJI may not be able to fulfill certain requirements. So now it's our time to come in and take market share away, and they're over promising products. And I remember, I think it was 2016 at the Inner Drone keynote, I called out that tactic back then, that we got to get the industry to a place where we do validated information, where we don't say, things that are not true because it doesn't help. It may give you a sale, but it hurts the industry. And unfortunately, we've gotten back to that point where there's a lot of claims being made. Suddenly, these made in USA drones appear that still have components in it that don't meet the NDAA regulatory outline, or that drone manufacturers make promises about what their drones can do when in reality it looks differently. It doesn't help the industry. We have to mature and we have to be more responsible. And what it really does is it brings a lot of uncertainty into public safety, because these individuals are no drone experts. They are experts in saving your life, in saving your building, in de-escalating situations. They don't know the ins and outs of the drone industry. And if we come in and we overpromise and underdeliver, it hurts every single person and entity in the drone industry. And so that is one of my biggest concerns right now with what is happening, that the industry oftentimes overpromises and underdelivers.
Yep. I have one.
That's a good way. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I had one more question, because I always ask it to all of our guests, and to finish up, a fun question: a favorite drone to fly?
Oh, that's a really good one. So in 2016, I was really trying to get my previous employer to do a VTOL platform, because I was just so fascinated with VTOL, and unfortunately I wasn't successful. But that desire to bring in a VTOL into public safety, into other areas, has just stayed with me. And the other day I was able to fly a VTOL, the Vector from Quantum Systems, and it was just incredible. That feeling of seeing this very large platform that packs into a backpack, lift off like a helicopter, like a quadcopter, and then nicely transitions into forward flight and just soaring away. It was so much fun. It was so impressive, and that has become my favorite drone. And I'm heading to Europe over the next few days, and I will spend more time with the team on this platform. Hopefully we'll go to the manufacturer and spend some time with them, because I see so much opportunity in that VTOL concept, and that has become my favorite drone right now.
Awesome. That's a great last question and a great answer. It's a Friday afternoon. Thank you so much, Romeo, for spending more than an hour with us on the piXL Drone Show. It's been awesome. It's been a pleasure, and for all of us, I think, to have you on as a guest, and super informative. I think your role in the drone industry is far from done. I think we need more people like you who promote drones. I don't care what brand or what product, but I think there's a lot of how do you say that? A lot of untapped potential still for drones. So we need people that are passionate and then help share this message. So thank you again, and yeah, have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you, Romeo.
Thank you.